The commercial airliner banked gently through morning clouds at 35,000 feet, its passengers lost in books, screens, and sleep. In seat 91C, a woman in her late 50s stared through the oval window at the vast emptiness below. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back simply. Her clothes were unremarkable jeans, a faded jacket, reading glasses perched on a paperback she hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes. To everyone around her, she was invisible. Just another middle-aged passenger on a flight from San Diego to Virginia. But in the cockpit, something was happening that would change everything. The radio crackled, static, then a voice, calm but carrying an undercurrent of tension that only trained ears would catch. United 2847, this is Reach 11. You have fighter escort at your 7 o'clock, maintaining standard intercept distance. Do not be alarmed. This is a scheduled honor flight. Please confirm you copy. Captain Mitchell, a 20-year veteran of commercial aviation, glanced at his co-pilot. Neither had ever received a message like this. His hand hovered over the radio. Reach 11, United 2847. Copy that, but can you clarify honor flight? We weren't briefed on any. United 2847, confirmation is inbound from your operations. We're maintaining position. Check your 9 o'clock low in approximately 30 seconds. Mitchell leaned forward, peering through the windscreen. His co-pilot was already looking, forehead pressed against the glass. Then they saw them, two shapes rising through the cloud layer like ghosts made solid. A-10 Thunderbolts, close enough to see the shark teeth painted on their noses, close enough to see the pilots. And then one of the fighters did something unprecedented. It rolled slowly, deliberately, exposing its full wingspan to the airliner. The other followed. A maneuver called a victory roll, something pilots did only for the most sacred occasions. "What the hell is happening?" the co-pilot whispered. Mitchell keyed the radio again, his voice steadier now but edged with confusion. "Reach 11, we're visual on two A-10s. Can you please explain what's going on? We have 300 passengers aboard. Some of them are looking out the windows." There was a pause. Then the voice returned, but this time it was different, quieter, almost reverent. "United 2847, do you have a passenger in seat 91C? Last name Kestrel, first name Rowan." Mitchell's co-pilot was already pulling up the manifest on his tablet, fingers moving fast. His eyes widened. "Sir? Yes, Rowan Kestrel, female, age 57, that's all it says." The radio hissed again. "United 2847, you're carrying Viper 6. Repeat, Viper 6 is on your bird. We're not escorting your plane, we're escorting her." In the cabin, passengers were beginning to notice. Phones came out. A child pointed. A man pressed his face to the window and gasped. The A-10s held formation, their engines a low growl felt more than heard, a rumble that vibrated through the fuselage like a heartbeat from the sky itself. And in seat 91C, Rowan Kestrel closed her eyes. She hadn't asked for this. In fact, she'd specifically requested the opposite. When she booked the flight 3 weeks ago under her legal name, no rank, no call sign, she thought she'd finally achieved what had eluded her for decades: anonymity. After 32 years in the cockpit, after missions that had no names and operations that didn't officially exist, she wanted to disappear. Not out of shame, not out of bitterness, but because the weight of being remembered was sometimes heavier than the weight of being forgotten. Her hand rested on the armrest, fingers tracing an unconscious pattern, a habit, the same motion she used to make on the throttle of an A-10 during long reconnaissance flights over Kandahar, over Fallujah, over mountains whose names were still classified. She could still feel the stick in her palm, the vibration of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon spooling up, the way the aircraft shuddered when it unleashed 30mm freedom on targets below. But that was another life. The flight attendant appeared at her row, a young man with kind eyes and a confused smile. "Excuse me, ma'am. The captain would like to speak with you." Rowan opened her eyes slowly. She didn't look surprised. I'm fine here, thank you. Ma'am, he really insists. He said it's important. Around them, passengers were craning their necks. A teenage girl, too, rose up, had her phone out, filming the fighters through the window. An older man in a navy ball cap was standing now, staring at Rowan with an expression she recognized instantly, recognition struggling to become certainty. She sighed, so much for invisible. Tell the captain I appreciate the gesture, but I'd prefer to stay seated. The flight attendant hesitated, then nodded and retreated toward the cockpit. Rowan could see him speaking into the intercom phone, his eyes darting back toward her. 30 seconds later, the PA system clicked on. Captain Mitchell's voice filled the cabin, steady and professional, but underneath it was something else. Awe, maybe, or reverence. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. You may have noticed we have some unusual company outside. Those are two United States Air Force A-10 Thunderbolts, also known as Warthogs. They've joined us as an honor escort. It's my privilege to inform you that we have a very special passenger on board today. In seat 91C is retired Lieutenant Colonel Rowan Kestrel, call sign Viper 6. She is one of the most decorated combat pilots in Air Force history. The cabin erupted, not in applause yet, that would come, but in a wave of gasps, murmurs, the rustle of 300 people turning in their seats to look. Rowan kept her eyes forward, her jaw set. Her fingers stopped moving on the armrest. Colonel Kestrel, Mitchell continued, his voice softer now, flew more than 400 combat missions over a career spanning 3 decades. She is a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, the Silver Star, and the Air Force Cross. She has saved more lives than most of us will ever meet. And today, those pilots out there, her brothers and sisters in arms, wanted to make sure she knew she's not forgotten. Now the applause came, scattered at first, then building. The man in the navy ball cap was saluting, tears on his face. A woman 3 rows back stood, her hand over her heart. The teenage girl with the phone was crying. Rowan finally turned to look out the window. The A-10s were still there, holding position with a precision that spoke of hundreds of hours in formation. She could see the lead pilot now, helmet turning slightly toward the airliner. And then, slowly, he raised a gloved hand. Not a wave, a salute. Something inside Rowan cracked. Not broke, she'd been broken before and knew what that felt like. This was different. This was the fissure of something long sealed splitting open. She raised her hand, pressed it flat against the cold window, and held it there. The co-pilot in the A-10 waggled the wings, once, twice. The international signal for I see you, I acknowledge you. The PA clicked again. Colonel Kestrel, if you're willing, we'd be honored if you join us in the cockpit. She closed her eyes again, took a breath, then another. Around her, the applause had faded into an expectant silence. She could feel every gaze in the cabin pressing against her shoulders. Finally, she unbuckled her seatbelt. The walk down the aisle felt longer than any mission she'd ever flown. People reached out to touch her hand, her shoulder. The man in the navy ball cap whispered, "Thank you." A little boy, no more than 6, held up a toy fighter jet. She paused, took it gently, looked at it, and handed it back with a nod. When she reached the cockpit door, it was already open. Captain Mitchell stood aside, his eyes bright. "Colonel." "Just Rowan," she said quietly. "No, ma'am," he replied, "not today." She stepped into the cockpit and the world opened up. The sky stretched before her, impossibly blue, impossibly vast. And there, filling the windscreen, were the A-10s. Closer now. So close she could see the rivets on their wings, the scorch marks around the gun barrels, the faded paint where maintenance crews had patched combat damage. The radio crackled. "Viper 6, this is Reach 11. Actual call sign Hammer 23. It's an honor, ma'am." Rowan reached for the radio handset, her fingers steady despite the storm inside her chest. She keyed the mic. "Hammer 23, Viper 6, you're out of position. Standard escort is 500 meters." There was a pause, then laughter, warm, genuine. "Copy that, Viper. Old habits die hard. We wanted to make sure you saw us. I see you, Hammer. Ma'am, if I may, I flew with your wingman, Captain De Vries. He told me about Koust. Said you brought the entire strike package home through a sandstorm with one engine and no hydraulics. Said it was the best flying he ever saw. Rowan's throat tightened. Marcus De Vries. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 5 years. Marcus exaggerates. He really doesn't, ma'am. And he wanted me to tell you if I ever had the chance that he named his daughter after you. Rowan De Vries. She's 7 now. The cockpit blurred. Rowan blinked hard. Tell him that's the greatest honor I've ever received. We'll do, Viper 6. We're going to break off in 30 seconds. Our fuel state won't let us follow you all the way home, but we wanted you to know the sky still remembers. The A-10s peeled away in perfect unison, their wings catching the sunlight as they rolled and dove back toward the earth. Rowan watched them go until they were nothing but specks, then shadows, then memory. Captain Mitchell cleared his throat. Colonel, I have to ask, why Viper 6? What's the story? Rowan turned from the window, her face composed again, the mask back in place. But her eyes held something new, or perhaps something old rekindled. It's not a story for polite company, Captain. He smiled. Try me. She glanced at the co-pilot, who nodded eagerly. Then she sighed, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Helmand Province, 2009. I was leading a 6-ship strike on a Taliban compound. Intelligence said it was empty. It wasn't. We took fire on the first pass, heavy, coordinated. One of my pilots took a hit to his hydraulics, started losing altitude. I called for him to punch out. He refused, said he could make it back. She paused, her gaze distant. He couldn't, not alone. So I dropped down, matched his speed, talked him through every system failure. We flew like that for 40 minutes, him barely holding it together, me on his wing, feeding him instructions. Tower wanted me to leave him, said I was risking 2 birds instead of 1. I told them no. Call sign stayed with me after that, Viper, because I wouldn't let go. And the 6, the co-pilot asked softly. That was the 6th time I'd done it. The cockpit fell silent. Outside, the sky stretched on forever, blue and endless and indifferent. But inside, in that small space filled with instruments and controls, and 3 people who understood what it meant to hold lives in your hands, something sacred settled. Thank you, Mitchell said finally, for everything. Rowan nodded once. Then she turned and walked back to her seat, the eyes of 300 passengers following her every step. When she sat down, the teenager with the phone leaned across the aisle. Colonel, can I ask you something? Rowan looked at her, saw herself at 16, hungry and angry and desperate to prove something to a world that didn't want to listen. Go ahead. Is it true, what they said about you saving people? Rowan thought about Marcus De Vries, about the pilot over Helmand, about the hundreds of missions where she'd been the angel on someone's shoulder guiding them home. I tried, she said quietly. That's all any of us can do. The girl nodded, her eyes shining. I want to be a pilot. Then be one. My dad says girls can't fly fighters. Rowan's expression hardened. Your dad's wrong. The girl smiled then, a smile full of hope and defiance, and Rowan felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The rest of the flight passed in a strange dream. Passengers approached her in 1s and 2s, each with a story or a question, or simply a need to shake her hand. A veteran from Desert Storm who'd been extracted by A-10s covering his position. A teacher whose brother had been saved during a convoy ambush in Iraq, the warthogs appearing like thunder from heaven. A grandmother whose grandson was in pilot training at Laughlin. Rowan listened to each of them, spoke when words were needed, held silence when it was not. She signed napkins, boarding passes, a child's coloring book. She posed for photos with trembling hands on her shoulders, strangers' gratitude pouring over her in waves she hadn't expected and couldn't stop. When they finally touched down in Virginia, the pilot made one last announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we taxi to the gate, I want you to look out the left side of the aircraft." Rowan knew what she'd see before she looked, knew it in her bones. The tarmac was lined with vehicles, fire trucks, ground crew vans, maintenance carts, and standing beside them at attention were dozens of people in uniform. Air Force, Navy, Marines, Army, all of them saluting. The water cannon salute arched over the plane as they passed beneath it, droplets catching rainbows in the afternoon sun. The cabin fell into hushed reverence. Several passengers were openly weeping. Rowan pressed her forehead against the window and closed her eyes. When the plane stopped at the gate, no one moved. Captain Mitchell's voice came one last time. "Colonel Kestrel, you have priority deplaning. The honor is yours." She stood slowly, gathered her small bag from the overhead bin, and walked toward the exit. The flight attendant stood at attention. A businessman saluted awkwardly. A child waved. At the door, she paused and turned back to look at the cabin one last time. 300 faces looked back at her. 300 stories she'd never hear. 300 lives that had briefly intersected with hers. "Thank you," she said simply, "for letting an old pilot come home." Then she stepped out into the jetway, and into whatever came next. But she wasn't prepared for what waited at the gate. The terminal had been cleared. Security stood at the perimeter, holding back crowds of travelers who pressed against the barriers, phones out, some crying, some cheering. In the center of the open space stood a formation of men and women in dress blues, 30, maybe 40 of them. Officers and enlisted, young faces and old. And at their head stood a woman in a major general's uniform, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. General Patricia Vance, Rowan's first squadron commander, the woman who'd signed off on her fighter transition 35 years ago when the program was brand new and everyone said it would fail. Rowan stopped at the end of the jetway. For a moment the old instincts took over. She straightened, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. But she wasn't in uniform, hadn't been for 3 years, so she simply stood there, unsure of what protocol demanded. General Vance crossed the distance between them in 10 measured strides. When she was close enough, she did something Rowan never expected. She smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, and extended her hand. "Rowan Kestrel, you're a hard woman to retire." Rowan took the hand, gripped it firmly. "Ma'am, I didn't ask for any of this." "I know, that's exactly why it's happening." Vance glanced over her shoulder at the formation behind her. "These are pilots from Langley, Dover, and Quantico. Every one of them requested to be here. Some of them flew with you, some knew people who did, and some just wanted to meet the legend." "I'm not a legend," Rowan said quietly. "I was just doing my job." "That's what all the legends say." Vance turned, gesturing for Rowan to follow. "Walk with me." They moved through the terminal together, the formation falling in behind them at a respectful distance. Travelers at the barriers watched in silence, phones recording every moment. Rowan could hear the click of cameras, the whisper of voices, but it all felt distant, muted, as if she were moving through water. "You know why I'm here?" Vance asked. "To make sure I don't embarrass myself." Vance laughed, a sharp, genuine sound. "To make sure you understand something you never seemed to grasp during your entire career. You changed everything, Rowan. When you transitioned to the A-10 in '93, you weren't just the first woman in the program. You were the first one who made it impossible for them to say no to the next one, and the one after that. You flew so well, so fearlessly, that you removed doubt from the equation. There were other women. There were, but you were different. You didn't just survive the program. You excelled. You made them rewrite the combat effectiveness metrics. You proved that the problem wasn't female pilots. It was the assumption that we couldn't handle it." Vance paused at a window overlooking the tarmac, where C-17s and fighter jets sat in neat rows. "Do you know how many women are flying combat aircraft right now because of you?" Rowan shook her head. "Hundreds, maybe thousands, and they all owe you a debt they'll never be able to repay." Vance's expression softened. "So when I heard you were coming through on a commercial flight trying to slip home quietly, I made some calls, called in some favors, because you don't get to disappear, Colonel. Not yet. Not until you understand what you mean." Rowan's throat tightened again. "I never wanted to be a symbol." "Too bad, you are one anyway." They reached a private lounge that had been requisitioned for the occasion. Inside, more uniforms, more faces, and in the corner, standing quietly with his hands clasped behind his back, was Marcus de Vries. He'd aged, gray at the temples now, lines around his eyes, but the smile was the same, crooked, warm, full of mischief. When he saw Rowan, he straightened, and for just a moment she saw the young captain she'd flown with over Afghanistan, the kid who'd been terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. "Viper," he said, his voice rough. "Bulldog," she replied, using his old call sign. They met in the middle of the room, and without a word, Marcus pulled her into a hug. Rowan stiffened for half a second, then relaxed, her arms coming up to return the embrace. Around them, the room fell silent. When they separated, Marcus wiped his eyes unabashedly. "I told you I'd see you again. You also told me you'd quit flying after Koust. Looks like we're both liars." He laughed. "I lasted 6 months. Turns out sitting behind a desk was worse than getting shot at." His expression grew serious. "I meant what I said, Rowan, about my daughter. She asks about you all the time. Wants to know everything about the woman she's named after." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did, because you saved my life. And not just that day, every day after. You taught me what it meant to be a pilot, to put the mission first but never forget the people." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. A little girl with dark curls and bright eyes, sitting in the cockpit of an A-10, her hands on the stick, her face glowing with joy. "That's her. 7 years old and already obsessed with flying." Rowan took the photo gently, studied it. Saw the future in that child's eyes, the same hunger she'd felt at that age, the same certainty that the sky was where she belonged. "She's beautiful. She wants to meet you, if you're willing." Rowan looked up at him, then at General Vance, then at the room full of uniforms and expectant faces. For the first time in 3 years, she felt the weight of retirement lift just slightly. "I'm willing." The room erupted in applause, not the polite clapping of strangers, but the hard, sharp sound of respect given freely. Rowan stood there, surrounded by the people who understood what it cost to fly, to fight, to come home. And for the first time since she'd hung up her wings, she felt like she belonged somewhere. General Vance stepped forward again. "There's one more thing, you're being recalled." Rowan blinked. "Ma'am." "Not for combat, for training. The Air Force is standing up a new program, advanced tactics and combat leadership for the next generation of fighter pilots. We need instructors who have been there, done it, and can teach not just the mechanics but the mindset. You're being offered a position as senior instructor at Nellie's." "I'm 57 years old. And you've forgotten more about flying than most of these kids will ever learn. The position is yours if you want it. No pressure, but we're hoping you'll say yes." Rowan looked around the room again, saw the faces of pilots who wanted to learn from her, saw Marcus, who'd named his daughter after her, saw the teenage girl from the plane who wanted to believe that girls could fly fighters. She took a breath. "When do I start?" The news spread fast. By the time Rowan left the terminal, social media was ablaze with videos from the flight, the A-10 escort, the water cannon salute, passengers weeping as she walked down the aisle. The hashtag #Viper6 was trending worldwide. News outlets picked up the story. A video of the formation saluting her plane had 20 million views in 6 hours. But Rowan barely noticed. She was too busy answering emails from the Air Force, coordinating with Nellie's, and trying to wrap her head around the fact that retirement was officially over. Marcus drove her to her sister's house in Arlington, where she'd been planning to spend a quiet few weeks decompressing. Instead, She found the porch filled with flowers, letters, and care packages from strangers. Her sister, Diana, met her at the door with tears streaming down her face. "You didn't tell me," Diana said, half laughing, half sobbing. "You never told me how important you were." "I'm not important, I just flew planes." "Rowan, the president called. The actual president. He wants to meet you." Rowan groaned. "Tell him I'm busy." "You can't tell the president you're busy." "Watch me." But she couldn't escape it. The calls kept coming. Interview requests from major networks, invitations to speak at military academies, a book publisher offering a six-figure advance for her memoir. It was overwhelming, exhausting, and deeply uncomfortable for someone who'd spent her entire career avoiding the spotlight. On the third night, she sat on Diana's back porch with a glass of bourbon and stared at the stars. Marcus found her there an hour later, two more glasses in hand. "Figured you could use company," he said, sitting beside her. "I could use silence." "Too bad you're famous now." Rowan grimaced. "I hate it." "I know, but it matters, Rowan. People need heroes, especially now." Marcus took a sip of his drink, his gaze distant. "When I was overcast, losing altitude, losing hope, you know what kept me from punching out? Common sense. Your voice, calm, steady, telling me we'd get through it together. I believed you because you'd never lied to me before, and that belief, that trust, it saved my life." He turned to look at her. "That's what people see when they look at you, not just a pilot, a symbol of something they need to believe in. That courage exists, that excellence is possible, that someone will be there when everything falls apart." Rowan swirled the bourbon in her glass. "That's a lot of pressure." "It is, but you've carried worse." They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, the stars wheeling overhead, the night air cool and soft. Finally, Rowan spoke. "Nellie's, you think I can still do it?" Marcus smiled. "I think those kids at Nellie's are about to get the education of their lives." 3 weeks later, Rowan stood in front of a classroom at Nellie's Air Force Base, facing 30 of the best young pilots the Air Force had to offer. They stared at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to outright awe. She recognized that look. She'd worn it herself once, a lifetime ago. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Rowan Kestrel, call sign Viper 6. I'll be your senior instructor for advanced combat tactics. Before we begin, I want to make one thing clear. I don't care about your gender, your background, or your politics. I care about one thing: whether you can fly, whether you can think, whether you can lead. Everything else is noise." A hand went up in the back. A young lieutenant with a cocky grin. "Ma'am, is it true you flew 400 combat missions?" 437. "And you never lost a wingman?" "That's correct." "How?" Rowan smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. "By being better than the enemy, and by never ever giving up. That's what you're here to learn, not just how to fly an aircraft, how to survive when everything goes wrong, how to bring your people home." She turned to the screen behind her, pulling up a tactical map. "Helmand Province, 2009. Six-ship strike package. Taliban compound. We took fire on the first pass. Who can tell me what the textbook response is?" Hands shot up. She called on a young woman in the front row. "Ma'am, break contact, reassess, coordinate with ground forces for updated targeting." "Correct, that's the textbook answer. Now let me tell you what actually happened." Rowan clicked to the next slide, showing gun camera footage from that day. "We took fire. My wingman's hydraulics failed. He started losing altitude. Command ordered me to break off, let him punch out. I refused. Instead, I dropped down, matched his speed, and talked him through 40 minutes of emergency flying while taking fire from the ground. We both made it home." The classroom was silent, every eye locked on her. "The textbook will keep you alive 80% of the time," Rowan continued. "But the other 20%, the moments when everything falls apart, that's when you need something more. Instinct, courage, The willingness to trust yourself even when everyone else says you're wrong. She paused, letting the words sink in. That's what I'm here to teach you, not just the rules, but when to break them. A murmur rippled through the room. The cocky lieutenant in the back grinned wider. Ma'am, when do we start flying? Rowan's smile matched his. Right now, gear up, we're going to the range. The next 6 months were a blur. Rowan threw herself into teaching with the same intensity she'd brought to combat flying. She pushed her students hard, harder than they'd ever been pushed. Made them fly scenarios that had no good answers, only less bad ones. Taught them to think 3 steps ahead, to anticipate not just what the enemy would do, but what their own aircraft would do when systems failed. Some of them washed out, couldn't handle the pressure, couldn't adapt fast enough, but the ones who stayed, they transformed. Rowan saw it happening in real time. The way they approached problems shifted. The way they talked on the radio changed. They stopped sounding like students and started sounding like combat pilots. Marcus visited when he could, bringing his daughter Rowan, Ro for short, with him. The little girl was shy at first, hiding behind her father's leg. But when Rowan knelt down to her level and asked if she wanted to see the cockpit of an A-10, Ro's face lit up like the sun. They spent an afternoon in the hangar, Rowan explaining every switch, every gauge, every system. Ro listened with an intensity that reminded Rowan of herself at that age. Asked questions that were smarter than they had any right to be. And when Rowan lifted her into the pilot's seat, let her wrap her small hands around the stick, something shifted in the air between them. It feels like flying already, Ro whispered. That's because it is, Rowan replied. Flying isn't just what the plane does, it's what you feel. The connection between you and the machine and the sky. When you understand that, really understand it, you'll be unstoppable. Ro looked up at her with wide, serious eyes. Will you teach me, when I'm old enough? Rowan felt her heart crack open again. If your dad lets me. Marcus, watching from the hangar floor, nodded. I can't think of anyone better. The story spread. More videos surfaced online, Rowan in the classroom, fierce and focused. Rowan on the flight line, walking her students through pre-flight checks. Rowan in the air, her voice on the radio calm and commanding as she guided a panicking student through an engine failure. The comments were overwhelming. People called her a national treasure, an inspiration, a hero. But the most meaningful message came from someone unexpected. A private email forwarded through official channels. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." Rowan opened it late one night, alone in her quarters on base. Colonel Kestrel, you don't know me, but you saved my brother's life. Captain James Riley, 2011 convoy ambush outside Fallujah. He was pinned down out of ammo, certain he was going to die. Then he heard the sound, that beautiful, terrible sound of an A-10's gun. He said it was like God himself had arrived. You circled his position for 20 minutes, kept the enemy suppressed until extraction arrived. He made it home, got married, has 2 kids now, all because of you. I just wanted you to know you didn't just save one life that day. You saved all of us, his wife, his children, his parents, me. Thank you for being there. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for not giving up. Respectfully, Sarah Riley. Rowan read the email 3 times. Then she closed her laptop, walked outside and looked up at the stars. The same stars she'd flown under in Fallujah. The same stars that had witnessed every mission, every close call, every moment of terror and triumph. And for the first time in her life, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, it had all meant something. The ceremony happened on a cold December morning, 6 months after Rowan returned to service. The Air Force had decided to officially recognize her contributions with the Air Force Cross, one of the highest honors for valor. General Vance presided, along with the Chief of Staff and a crowd of several hundred, pilots, officers, enlisted personnel, and civilians who traveled from across the country to be there. Rowan stood at attention in her dress blues, the uniform feeling strange after years of civilian clothes. Her ribbon rack was impressive, rows of colored fabric representing decades of service. But today, One more would be added. General Vance stepped forward with the medal, her expression solemn. Lieutenant Colonel Rowan Kestrel, by order of the President of the United States and the Secretary of the Air Force, you are hereby awarded the Air Force Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. Your actions on November 12, 2011, during a rescue mission in Fallujah, saved the lives of 12 American soldiers under heavy enemy fire. Despite sustaining damage to your aircraft and facing overwhelming opposition, you maintained position over the convoy for 23 minutes, expending all ordnance and making multiple gun runs to suppress enemy forces until extraction was complete. Your courage, skill, and dedication to your fellow service members exemplify the highest traditions of military service. Vance pinned the medal to Rowan's uniform, then stepped back and saluted. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, but Rowan barely heard it. She was thinking about that day in Fallujah, the fear in the voices on the radio, the weight of the aircraft as she dove again and again, the certainty that she might not make it home. She'd done it anyway, because that's what you did. You showed up. You held the line. You brought people home. After the ceremony, there was a reception. More handshakes, more photos, more strangers with stories about how she'd touched their lives. It was exhausting and humbling in equal measure. Marcus found her on a balcony overlooking the flight line, where A-10 sat in neat rows under the Nevada sun. "Hey, hero, trying to escape your own party." Something like that. He joined her at the railing, both of them watching as a pair of warthogs taxied for takeoff. The sound was visceral, a deep rumble that resonated in the chest, a promise of power and purpose. "Roe asked me to give you something," Marcus said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Rowan opened it carefully. It was a drawing, a child's sketch of an A-10 with Viper 6 written on the side in careful, blocky letters, and beneath it in the same careful hand, "Thank you for showing me that girls can fly. Love."